To answer your first question, yes, the collective concern that we have of chemicals is irrational, because chemical is such a broad term because it literally encompasses every physical object in the universe, and it doesn't make any sense to judge the quality or safety or efficacy of every single object in the universe using the same term, because they're so wildly different. Not only the substance is wildly different, but how they're used and the dosages in which they're used is just so wildly different. It doesn't make any sense to judge everything on Earth as good or bad. So chemophobia, the definition of it in the dictionary, actually includes the word irrational, because it is one of the irrational phobias. It's a learned aversion to chemicals that are perceived as toxic or synthetic or in other ways bad. And these kind of phobias are more akin to how somebody might become Islamophobic by watching too much of a certain news channel, or homophobic by listening to too many particular message. The good news about this is, because it's not a genuine clinical phobia, by changing the quality of the information that we put out and how we communicate with people and how we teach people about science and chemistry, we can actually help to overcome this phobia and make people feel better. So to answer your second question, which is about, is it natural to be preoccupied with where our food comes from? Well, historically, yes. It would have been an integral part of village life. To produce and consume your own food, both from plants and animals, was a very human thing to do back when early agriculture started. But today we've seen this very interesting trend in certain developed countries, particularly in the UK, in the US, in Australia, New Zealand, where we actually become quite willingly detached from how our food is produced. We don't want to eat food that closely resembles that of animals. We don't want to eat fish and chickens with their heads on. We don't want to eat parts of pigs that we feel might be disgusting, like say the trotters or the ears. We've become a bit squeamish, which is a little odd because most countries are not. It's just been a recent trend in those places, and interestingly, they're the countries, the squeamish countries, are the ones that are most prone to chemophobia. And it's not all developed countries, it's not even all Western countries. It's just those few for some reason have this strange attitude to food, that food should be clean and clinical, yet somehow natural at the same time. They're never really going to be satisfied if they have those criteria. So yes, it was natural to be preoccupied with the origins of our food, but not anymore. We actually don't want to know about it. It doesn't then surprise me that we're disgusted by the fact that not only do we kill animals, but we also add chemicals to our food. It doesn't surprise me that people are disgusted by that too, again, for no reason. To answer your second question about those multi-billion-dollar lawsuits against the major corporations that supposedly produce cancer-causing chemicals, I'd like you to look at which country these lawsuits are happening in. They're all in the United States, which is interesting. Over the border, you've got Canada, which has about 10% of the population, very similar culture. You'd expect roughly 10% of that number of cases to be happening in Canada, yet the number is 0. And the magnitude of some of these fines and payouts just seems to be so astronomical. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think we need to acknowledge that the legal system and political system in the US is somewhat broken, somewhat detached from science, and that should not come as a surprise to us. You've got, America is famous for silly lawsuits and lawsuits over nothing. Donald Trump's $1 billion lawsuit over an insult. It's a worrying trend in the United States, and only in the United States, and it's a symptom of a broken legal and political system. It's not a genuine reflection of the science. Now, when those cases get appealed, I can guarantee that those corporations will win the appeal. They will win the appeal, the decision will be overturned. And this inevitably does happen, by the way, but the overturned decisions don't often get printed in the press. It's the David versus Goliath stories, the innocent victim versus the giant corporation story. That makes the headlines, but then when it gets overturned, it often doesn't make the news. So yes, I think the decisions are incredibly unscientific, and the appeals will be won by the corporations. If we go by this logic, I mean, we'll end up in 10, 20 years suing basically everyone for, anybody who's ever grown herbs, because they contain carcinogens too. Cabbages, celery, anything. I mean, where does it end? It simply becomes ridiculous. to answer your fourth question, do organic farmers use pesticides? Absolutely, of course they do. Firstly, plants themselves produce 99.99% of the pesticides that we ingest daily, and there's no way of eliminating those from the plants. They're natural chemical weapons or secondary metabolites that plants produce because they can't run away from insect or predatory attack. They just have to produce chemicals that deters the predators or kills them. So these natural pesticides are always present, no matter whether the crop is farmed conventionally or organically or otherwise. Now, do farmers using the organic system spray extra pesticides on the surface of the crops? Absolutely, yes they do. And some of those pesticides are as toxic as the synthetic pesticides that are used on normal farms. That shouldn't worry us though, because the doses are regulated and tested, and they're shown to be safe, and provided you follow the guidelines set by your government authority, there'll be no health issues whatsoever. These have been extensively tested, and while it is true that usually organic farms use less pesticide, the pesticide shows no health effects whatsoever. In fact, it actually helps to improve yields, and there's been no nutritional difference shown between organically farmed crops and conventionally farmed crops. And maybe the odd study, for example, I remember the cauliflower study where there was more omega-3 in a cauliflower when it's farmed organically, but this is just really statistical noise. A giant meta-analysis found no difference. So yes, they use pesticides, no, that's not a problem, and organic farming is unsustainable.